if you're spending in the order of magnitude of like hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars a year with Google, it's not sufficient for them to just say, hey, here's your attribution, here's your reporting, and that's good enough. Like they kind of needed their own systems to be able to validate everything. And they had teams of causal economists, data engineers, product teams that I worked with closely. If somebody searches for Jones Road Beauty in Google, did you need to serve an ad? Did you need to do a brand search ad?
Would they have bought anyways?
Would they have bought it anyways? Because they're searching for your exact thing. They're not searching for other competitive companies or anything else. A really common example is like if you're at a coffee shop and there's a little sign for a cappuccino at the cash register and you order a cappuccino, did that sign get you to buy a cappuccino, or did it just have perfect attribution because it was shown to everybody who ended up buying one?
Welcome to Down to Chat. I have no idea what episode this is, but I'm super excited about today's episode. Today, I'm actually solo with a guest. Eli's not here. We're doing another one later on today, but I'm super excited to get really nerdy into some growth stuff, and I've got an amazing guest. I've got Zach Epstein, who's the founder of Haus. I'm going to let Zach introduce himself in a second, but Zach is an amazing guy. He's really, really smart, ex-Googler, who's building a platform that we are currently using and finding a lot of success from, called Haus, to really make incrementality testing a lot easier and more measurable for brands. So Zach, thanks so much for joining us and welcome on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
I'm super excited, man. I'm really excited. I think Haus is blowing up right now. Everyone's talking about incrementality, and I think you're building something cool. So would love to get into it super quick. Would love for you to just do a super quick bio about yourself and kind of how, the genesis story of Haus would be great.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I founded Haus originally in July of 2021. Before this, I was at Google for 7 years. When I was at Google, I held a variety of roles that I think are relevant to what we're doing here. I was an analytical lead working on the entertainment analytics team. So if you think like companies like Netflix, Hulu, like large entertainment advertisers. I was leading the entertainment analytics team for a while. And then probably most relevant for what we're doing here is I was leading a lot of initiatives on advanced attribution and experimentation. So I was deeply embedded with the conversion lift team, geo experiments, all of the kind of measurement methodologies that come out of Google. And I was really focused on how do we help the world's most sophisticated advertisers, think of like a Netflix or a Booking.com or an Uber, eBay, the people who really care about incrementality. How do we help them build an infrastructure to validate the results that they're seeing from a Google and from a Meta in their own data? And the way to think about this is if you're spending in the order of magnitude of like hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars a year with Google, it's not sufficient for them to just say, hey, here's your attribution, here's your reporting, and that's good enough. Like they kind of needed their own systems to be able to validate everything. And they had teams of causal economists, data engineers, product teams that I worked with closely. And then the last 2 years I was at Google, I actually moved into product where I was a product manager, specifically in YouTube ads. But I was working on the future of cookieless and IDFA-less ad targeting. So like advanced contextual targeting, keywords, topics. I was working on a lot in the placement picker, but pretty technical understanding of what was going on and how to be able to target users without a deterministic resolved user ID. And in working on that, I just became enamored with what was going on in the measurement space and how the measurement space is really changing, how systems like conversion lift or like first-party platform-based conversion lift or incrementality-based reporting are going to have just more, first of all, privacy challenges in the future, but also just cross-network reconciliation issues of how do you resolve Google and Meta? Like they're both telling me something, but what do I do with this? Like it's great that I get a CPIA from one platform, but it's not necessarily equivalent to another. And I realized there was another way. Like I've built these types of systems out with companies before, and I thought about what if I did this as an independent platform where we could work directly for brands and make sure that we're highly incentivized and aligned with our only goal is to help companies reduce costs, increase profits, increase revenue. Since then we've sort of been off to the races. First step was convincing my partner to let me quit my job and found the company.
That's probably the hardest part.
Yeah, that was the hardest part. I was self-funding it in the early days with my own money. And now almost 2 years later, we're working with, a broad spectrum of brands, seeing some really amazing and just super interesting.
Who are some brands besides Jones Road, who's a customer? Who else can you tell us that you guys are working with?
Yeah, so some that we've had like published case studies with are FanDuel, Ritual Vitamin, Caraway, Jasper AI is a customer.
Nice.
Sunday Lawn Care is a customer. So a lot in the e-commerce, D2C. Sonos is a customer. It's another one. Like D2C, e-commerce, but also mobile apps, and really spanning. I can talk about like the types of customers that get the most benefit from Haus, but like trying to sell something online or trying to get people to take a specific action are the folks who definitely have the most benefit with us.
Season 3 of Down to Chat is brought to you by Tapcart. We've chatted a bunch about Tapcart in the past, but they make it extremely easy to create an app that often sees higher conversion, higher AOV, higher LTV from all the folks that use it. I wanted to briefly highlight our friends Ron and Ash from Obvi. You've probably seen them on Twitter. They create a ton of magic with Obvi. Some stats that they've seen with Tapcart: 100% higher conversion rate in-app versus mobile web, 95% app user retention, 15+% higher AOV in-app, and 1.5x transactions on app for everyone on their website. If looking at these stats, their app has an impressive conversion rate, on app versus mobile web, higher retention, higher AOV, all of which, increase their LTV and overall revenue. They're so awesome at creating a community and driving that community towards their app as a tool to turn shoppers into brand advocates. If you've not yet checked out Tapcart, check them out today and get up to 2 months free when you sign up. It's tapcart.com/down-to-chat, tapcart.com/down-to-chat. Now let's get into it.
So help me understand the problem. I mean, I understand it, but I want to try to, communicate it. We've probably got, pretty wide range of people listening to this. Probably people just launching, might not be as sophisticated with, the technical aspects, and might not know what incrementality is, all the way to probably 9-figure businesses who might even be a customer or are doing it. So help me understand the problem. What is incrementality, and why should people be thinking about it, and, moving maybe beyond what Google or Meta is telling them?
Yeah, I mean, the concept of incrementality, I think, is one that we all think about inherently in our lives. But for some reason, a lot of us just don't apply to the world of marketing immediately. Where the question is always, would this action have taken place if I didn't intervene or if I didn't do anything? The really obvious example, use Jones Road Beauty as like an example, is if somebody searches for Jones Road Beauty in Google, did you need to serve an ad? Did you need to do a brand search ad?
Would they have bought anyways?
Would they have bought it anyways? Because they're searching for your exact thing. They're not searching for other competitive companies or anything else. So there's always that question, or a really common example is if you're at a coffee shop and there's a little sign for a cappuccino at the cash register and you order a cappuccino, did that sign get you to buy a cappuccino, or did it just have perfect attribution because it was shown to everybody who ended up buying one? And
it's just like a checkpoint.
It's like a checkpoint. And it's one of the big things that's changed in the world of marketing is, for a long time, advertising was not hyper-targeted, super specific, tracking you around the web, and like really sophisticated algorithms or artificial intelligence and the targeting infrastructure. Now, companies kind of know what you're going to do, or these ad platforms know what you're going to do before you do it. So often there's a question of did I need to serve these ads, or was I just wasting our money? And so when you get your platform reporting results, if you get something from Google or from Meta, and Meta says there's 100 conversions and Google says there's 100 conversions, there's a number of questions I think companies should be asking themselves. First, they should be saying, did I need to spend this money in order to get these sales? Yes or no? And then there's a whole cross-network component of, Google says there's 100 and Facebook says there is 100, but in your data warehouse, there might not actually be 200 sales. There's definitely a cross-collaboration effort here. And, these are the types of issues we really try to help companies understand is, what are your ads actually contributing to your business, understanding the cannibalization of where your other media might be running.
Awesome. Cool. No, that's a great answer. And I think pretty much anyone will be able to understand that. Just another one, would love for you to explain kind of what a holdout is, maybe do a two sell, 3 sell, but just explain kind of how you validate and do these experiments would be awesome.
Fundamentally, in any of these marketing experiments, the question you're trying to ask yourself is, what happens in a world where my ads exist versus what happens in a world where my ads don't exist? And the question is really just, how do you construct that world? So if you're a Google or you're a Meta and you have signed in users, you can attribute people to treatment and control groupings. There's cross-device issues, there's email issues, you don't have an IDFA anymore, which can get a little bit more complicated. But fundamentally, who are you serving ads to and who are you not? And I had worked really closely with the team at Google who wrote the Ghost Bids paper as an example that talks about a lot of these issues. So that would be how a network would do it. You run into some tracking issues post iOS 14.5 and cookie deprecation. on the advertiser side. But then there's a company like Haus, or like what we're trying to build is this agnostic platform that can work across every network in the exact same way, or you can even have Google or Facebook in the same experiment. And what we're doing is we are building scenarios or models where you're able to work on cross-network resolution of, in these geos, there is no advertising. We are creating a holdout of like, we are creating a synthetic world where your ads don't exist versus a world where your ads do. And then building, really sophisticated algorithms to compare what's happening where your ads are running versus what's happening where your ads aren't running. And by resolving off of a geo identifier, and we do this in a number of ways, but what it enables you to do is to say, hey, you can have a persistent identifier that works across Google and Meta, or Google and Meta and Snap or TikTok, all in the same experiment. But really, the question is just like, how do we create this world where there's no advertising? And then how do we create this world where there's advertising? And then compare them in a really precise way.
And then usually it's what you're saying, no advertising, it's really no advertising on this channel, right? So it's like if I wanted to measure the incrementality of Meta, I'm going to run Meta ads in a channel. Let's say you're on Google and TikTok as well. Everything else would be the same, but in your holdout, you just would not get the treatment, which would be no Meta, correct?
Exactly. So we're isolating it to that specific channel. I mean, some of our customers do cross-network experiments where they'll say, hey, we're actually not as interested in Meta alone. We're interested in Meta plus TikTok plus Pinterest. And then you can have a persistent holdout that works across those multiple networks. But if you're really trying to we want to understand what's happening here and then really understand, is our other marketing picking up that slack? Like that is really the question, is how much credit should I be assigning to this channel that would not have happened anyways without, running your advertising there?
And then you also have 3 cells, which I've learned and we've ran, where it's where you're running, different experiments in each one. Obviously, you always have a holdout, so you always have none. We'll talk about it later, but we did YouTube, so we did kind of business as usual, what we were spending on YouTube in 1 cell, holdout of none, and then increase spend on YouTube, because we wanted to answer the question, how incremental is current YouTube spend, and then what happens if we spend more?
Exactly. So a multi-cell experiment is you still have that holdout. So you're still able to create, what you're doing here is you're creating multiple worlds rather than a world where your ad exists and a world where your ad doesn't exist. You're creating 3 worlds. A world where your ad doesn't exist, and then where one subset of ads exist, and then where another set of ads exist. So in the case that you brought up, you'd have a control and you'd have a business as usual. So you could understand, hey, what is our marketing, YouTube as the example, what is YouTube contributing to the business? But then also, what would YouTube be contributing to the business if you increase the amount of spend or decrease the amount of spend or change the way you target or audiences or something else? And why this is really helpful is if you think about these from a modeling exercise, a lot of companies will be trying to model things and how do we make these numbers work? Everything that you do through a platform like Haus is observable. So we can say, hey, what actually happened was by spending more, you got this many new conversions or this many new sales. So it's really giving you that in your own data warehouse. So you're able to understand and synthesize the results and then apply it to your business going forward.
And primary KPIs, you're not looking at attribution, you're not looking at, however these ad platforms are modeling things and attributing, which is way beyond over my head, but you're looking at just what are your business KPIs? So look at revenue, new customer revenue, new orders, stuff like that.
Anything that companies are able to share with us, any data that makes the most sense for them. What are the questions that you as a CMO have? What are the questions that the board of directors might have, a finance team might have? How do you think about your business? And then how do we report out on the ways that you think about your business? This kind of goes into a whole other conversation around how convoluted the world of digital advertising is. And my just personal belief that it's deliberately complicated, where I think a lot of companies the Googles or the Metas or really any digital ad platform, they're here's impressions and clicks and views and engaged views and click-through conversions and different attribution models. And you get into all of this. And ultimately what a lot of marketers end up reporting on is something that the business doesn't really care about. The business isn't interested in click-through share. That isn't really kind of a metric anyone thinks about the health of their company. So really we try to focus on what does the company really care about? And then that is the reporting mechanism where we can say, hey, your advertising impacted this or your advertising didn't. We have different levels of shallowness of conversion events or kind of KPIs that can come through to Haus. But I always advocate for companies of we should be constructing things to answer the questions that people really have.
Is there is it pretty much always revenue kind of performance related, like revenue, new customer revenue, new orders, or do you ever measure stuff like traffic and the impact of maybe doing a holdout on traffic and sessions and things like that?
Yeah, it could be like it could be sessions, website visits, or things that people do. App installs is something
Okay.
that app-based companies can do.
Right.
But really, like we tried to build this in a flexible enough way where we can work on multiple metrics. But the other really powerful thing is we can report on multiple KPIs in the same experiment. So if the really thing you care about is revenue, but you also kind of want to know what happened with site visits, or you kind of want to know what happened with installs if you have them, we'd be able to report on those metrics as well. Like really
It's
anything
very
that gets
similar
passed
to like
us.
Google Optimize, like the setup to me, it kind of like seemed very similar. It's like, you go through, set up your experiment and you put in your primary KPI and then you're putting in like secondary.
Yeah, it's definitely it's not far off. I mean, like there's like the whole world of like DDA and like data driven attribution that we were pushing for a long time at Google. I think the thing that's really, I don't know, at least from my perspective, that's really different is like I really think about us as an extension of a data warehouse or like an extension of Shopify, where we are really neatly integrated with the company's own data and not having to like, hey, this is what we see on Android and let's apply it to iOS and because I think like iOS 14.5 and ATT really impacted a lot of that. So it's
Yeah.
really trying to be focused on this holistic view of, and one of the coolest things I think for us as Haus is we report on what companies see internally. Like it's really like these things are highly aligned.
Business level impact, which I know, Meta's out, they've got like the performance marketing summit, and I just saw some stuff on Twitter about it, but like I know they're coming out with their new like performance 5, and like one of the things that they keep preaching, I guess they already came out with it, is like business level impact. And I think when they say that, they're really like, how do ads and changes in your ad spend and your strategies really change not what you see in the platform, but what are the metrics that you actually care about, which is usually like CPA based off actual customers, not just a pixel event,
Yep.
and then also revenue.
It's like, how do we orient all companies to focus on what actually matters to them, or like actual customers rather than conversion pixel fires, or a lot of stuff that can happen in the world of marketing that isn't really what companies care about.
Is there like a minimum threshold size for this? Are there any companies or brands who you think, this is not ready for? Like, for example, so we use Northbeam additionally for, MTA, and we kind of, do a lot of things, and we'll look to kind of now start calibrating that with Haus. But, I think something like that, a Northbeam, is probably not relevant for a 7-figure business who's just spending on Meta. I don't think you have to get too scientific at that stage, because you're pretty much on one channel. And, if you're spending more on Facebook and your revenue goes up, that's great. Like, you probably don't have to hold out, at least my opinion is like,
Yeah.
you're just trying to find product market fit. But probably when you get into multiple channels, like, is that how you approach it? What size brands do you think this makes sense for?
Yeah, I think it really makes sense. Like, and where I think we're really most powerful is helping companies solve the cross-network issue. If you're advertising in more than one domain, I think a platform like Haus is really, really valuable. So if you're in Google and Meta, or Google and TikTok, or Meta and TikTok, really when you're in more than one place, otherwise I think the first-party platform reporting is definitely good enough. Also from like from a marketing investment standpoint, or I guess depending how you think of it from a revenue standpoint, if you're spending in the low single digits and millions, it's probably like, if I were just like a Zach, the marketing consultant, I'd probably be saying consolidate with Google or Meta, just really build a clear understanding of how your ads impact your business at that level, try to optimize within that bucket. And then when you're looking to expand, but like if you're spending still in the single digits of millions, I think it's really that, we want to understand across multiple networks, but also just if you're looking to grow your business with confidence, like how do we go from spending $3 million a year in marketing to 6 million or 8 million? We can be a really powerful tool to help companies build the confidence and like, what are you actually getting, and make that case with, finance executive teams. So I think it's really also, if you imagine your business is growing or changing, I think those are the other opportunities for a platform like Haus.
For sure. So if somebody's like, hey, we want to spend 3 this year, we want to spend 6 next year, what are the best channels for us to put that money in? That's kind of where it might make sense.
Exactly. Like you could test all of the new channels. You can understand how the existing channels are kind of being contaminated by what you're currently doing or what you're trying next. Like there's a whole cross network impact of like multiple channels taking credit for the same thing. So if you want to grow with confidence, or you want to increase the budget and you're not exactly sure how, this would be a really powerful opportunity, both in finding new platforms that could potentially work, but also then how to buy those platforms.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Totally. So want to switch gears a little bit. I think that's like great background on Haus and incrementality testing. You are probably sitting on a lot of really good data, and I respect that you can't share specifics unless it's, there's some case studies that, you're able to talk about. Definitely want to talk about Jones Road, kind of our initial results so far and kind of where we're going to go from it and some of the questions I want answered. But what can you tell me, like generally speaking, because I see so many debates on DTC Twitter and just like in DTC in general of like, this is the best strategy and that's one, and like brand search is incremental and brand search is not. And like I find so many people even throwing that word out there, and they're like, they haven't actually ran incrementality experiments. I know it varies against brands. Like, let's start brand search. Like, incremental or not, what do you find, or does it completely depend?
70 to 75% of the time it's not incremental. The more nuanced answer is it does depend. Like there's kind of
75% is pretty legit.
A lot of the time it doesn't do very much. I mean, really, and it just intuitively makes sense. Like the question, I mean, the good thing about brand search is it's very cheap. So even if it's very marginally incremental, it can be so cost efficient. Like the cost per incremental can end up being okay. Or some companies think about it, a little bit more as a one-off. Something I tend to think about a lot of, like, if you're in a highly conquested, competitive auction dynamic industry for brand search, it's more likely that your brand search is effective there. But something I've really been a long-term advocate of, both from when I was at Google and now as a third party, is using, like, Google search isn't necessarily, or brand search is not always an always-on strategy. Hey, let's just always do this because it gets a really efficient CPA. Maybe it's something you use from a more flighted component of, like, hey, Jones Road Beauty is launching a new product and we just really want to make sure that we're pushing people to that product. Maybe you run brand search for a week or two or whatever that ends up being, and thinking about it from a little bit more of a flighting standpoint, because also in the world of like search dynamics, conquesting an ads is super expensive. So for another company to buy Jones Road Beauty terms is really expensive for them. So that would be the other way of thinking about it, is like by having a little bit of your own spend, especially during like really critical or important periods, you'd, number one, be dramatically raising the price on that competitive set, but then also like kind of like making sure that during these really important or seasonally adjusted windows that you're present and available. But I think the always on brand search is the one that's going to be really challenging for folks.
That's interesting. I've never heard anybody talk about kind of a not always on brand search and kind of going on and off. But so for when it's not incremental, you find that people, if brand search is not on in those regions, they just go organic search and they're just kind of finding it organically, versus a reason why maybe conquesting or, brands with conquesting can be incremental is because some of those clicks and some of those brand clicks are getting clicked on by other Google ads, and people might just forget to order, or they actually might order a competitor. Is that why?
Yeah, exactly. So like if other people are coming in, they might order a competitor. If there's like a lot of people, like some people will, like, especially if you think of like mobile behavior, the brand search ad might take up the top of the screen and you just click on the thing that's there. It's actually a super interesting point, or something that we've seen in our data so far. And it's a little bit outside of the world of D2C, but for apps customers, people who are buying Apple search ads, which, in the Apple App Store, brand search there can be super incremental. Like, we're seeing super, super interesting and positive results there. And I think it's like, it's also the ad format and how they're displaying ads. And like in that environment, it just takes up a lot of the page. So there's really, customers can be really fickle or dependent in different areas. And I think the reason why you need to run like structured experiments through a platform like Haus is sometimes, like, if you're reporting on it at a high level, like heuristic KPI, you'll look at your data and say, hey, actually we're seeing fewer conversions. Like, if we're not buying brand search, like, is that really alarming? We think about our business that way. But oftentimes what brand search even does is not just causes incremental conversion. It might just cause people to sign up sooner. So like someone would have signed up on day one if there was a brand search ad, and they sign up like the next day or the day after if they didn't get that ad. And it's by running these experiments like 1 week, 2 week, 3 week, 4 week, you kind of neutralize these effects out of the models. So
interesting.
We've seen, like, a very long-winded way of saying, like, you see a lot with a lot of different brands. Like it really can be all over the place. But like if you're not seeing a ton of auction pressure on your brand, there's a pretty reasonable likelihood it's not doing very much. But I think other places like non-brand search can be super incremental, so it really can depend.
Down to Chat is brought to you by Postscript. In my opinion, Postscript is the SMS platform built for Shopify brands. To be totally transparent, we just switched at Jones Road to Postscript, and it is the best decision we've ever made. We were on a competitor before, and they started tacking on all types of fees. The platform was not being improved at all. It was just getting really expensive, and the service we were getting was just nothing compared to what we've received from Postscript since being with them. The product with Postscript is just hands down the best that I've ever used. To me, it has the best integrations for Shopify stores of all sizes. It's got the best feature set. The segmentation is the easiest and most powerful. The pop-ups are great. But really the thing that I love is I've never experienced such great service from a software provider. The only time I heard from our previous provider was around contract renewal time. But with Postscript, they've gone out of their way above and beyond to make our program uber successful. And it's really evident that they care about us getting as much value out of our program as possible. So in my opinion, with Postscript, you get the best product on the market, you get it at the best price, and you get it with the best service. There's a reason why the fastest growing Shopify brands like Dr. Squatch, Native, Olipop, Feastables, and now Jones Road Beauty are all using Postscript for their SMS program. Sign up for Postscript today to take your SMS program to new heights. So let's say we go back to brand. I guess two options. So A, it's, as I understand it, you get an incrementality factor, right? And you kind of understand how incremental. It's not necessarily saying shut it off, but maybe like change your in-platform targets, change your North Beam targets, and maybe don't spend as much on it. And for it to be profitable and incremental, maybe you just need a better ROAS than you thought. Is that fair? Rather than just thinking like black or white? Or you would say, if it's not incremental, just shut it off?
So I tend to, this is just my personal opinion. I think like reasonable, smart people can disagree on this. I tend not to take a super maximalist approach to these things. So let's just say, making up a fake example, but say a company is spending $1 million a month on brand search, and we find that it's not working. Like, you could just turn it off and move it somewhere else. And if you see really other profitable channels, maybe that's the right thing to do. But maybe a more prudent approach is saying, like, could we spend $500K efficiently and then run another experiment at a lower level? Could we run $200K? Then after like a subsequent series of tests, you're like, okay, we really don't think that this is working, or we want to do for some other kind of like flighted reason. That could be an approach. But I think sometimes people oversimplify these problems to like, it works or it doesn't work, without an understanding. Right. All marketing operates on a diminishing marginal return curve. Like, I mean, there's some very nuanced answers I can give you about why it would be an S curve with ML, but like, really in aggregate at $1 million, it might not be incremental, but it doesn't mean that there's not a washed out pocket within that where you could have a far more efficient, cost per incremental, and then, reallocate those investments into other channels that are really effective.
Well, I think that's a really good point, a topic. Let me know if I'm thinking about this correctly, but like one thing that I've kind of noticed is, so like last click, say what you want to last click, like we use like more of like a 1 day click, but we don't have the same 1 day click targets in like North Beam for every channel, because we understand, or at least we try to understand where they are at in the funnel. And, our Google ads or brand search has to have a very high, very strong ROAS versus maybe something like Meta is in the middle because we consider that mid funnel. And then like YouTube, we're confident being below a 1 because we have data, or at least have theories that it is more upper funnel, right? So like 1 day click might not capture all the value. Can you use incrementality to kind of downweight and upweight certain channels depending on where they are at in the funnel? Maybe like, I think what you said of talking about maybe, all right, like, because I think everybody has had it where they've had some senior leadership or board member or whatever be like, Google ROAS is so great, or like our Facebook retargeting is great, like put our money there, like put our budget there, cut Facebook prospecting. And they're like, well, how do you think people got there, right? Like, is that something that you can kind of help use these experiments to help, not necessarily shut off channels and be black and white, but like reallocate to get theoretically the most efficiency?
Absolutely. And I'll say that line of thinking is very dangerous. When you just look at those things at the very bottom, like I always thought about this as like, you need to feed the top of the funnel in order to have efficiency at the bottom of the funnel. Like, you're going to run into some big issues if you don't. So this is like a really powerful use case for 3-cell experiments with Haus. So imagine, just making up an example, but imagine that a company, like imagine Jones Road views search as lower funnel and you view Meta as mid funnel. And imagine like today it's 50-50. What you could be saying is like, hey, what if we actually change the allocation of like, we have a cross network experiment of Google and Meta in the same cells. And instead of like, you have a BAU cell of like 50-50, and then you have another cell of like, what if we put 75% towards Meta and 25% towards Google, of like, feed that upper funnel and assume other search or SEO will pick up some of the stuff in the bottom funnel. You can run these strategies as head to head against each other of like, not only like incrementality within a specific channel, but like different allocations of media. So for some of our larger customers, this is like a really common use case, is companies will test an MMM allocation. So if you run an MMM, you get a new, hey, this is the recommended allocation. They'll say, great, let's run that new recommendation against what we were doing before to see if it's actually performing better. And that can be like,
oh man, that makes so much sense. We're like dipping our toes into MMM with Northbeam, and it's so cool because it'll give us these like optimal spend allocations. And that makes it click for me, because I'm kind of like, all right, cool, like this is great. What do we actually do? If I take that advice and do it, how do I know if that worked or not?
Exactly.
So that's like, what people get when they're talking about calibrating MMM. That's what
exactly.
That looks like.
That's like an MMM calibration with an experiment framework like Haus, and it's one of the things that's so powerful about it, because ultimately, like in the world of MMM, like in doing the best that you can, it's always a forecast. Hey, it's like often it's a logistic regression, or like you get this data and you say, here's how we think that things will net out. The really powerful thing through like an experiment platform like us is like, all right, let's see if it actually worked. Like, let's see if what that allocation is doing. That gives you then an adjustment factor that you can feed back into your MMM to just calibrate it and make it even more efficient and more effective.
Yeah, it seems like it's like, I don't know the best analogy for it, but it's almost like they're cousins, and like they can kind of help each other to kind of help calibrate your spend.
I view the experiments that we do in MMMs as just like, they're super intertwined, super, additive. Like, I wouldn't say it necessarily makes sense for every company, because I think like generally speaking, MMMs, at least this is my personal opinion, tend to work better for a little larger businesses, just because smaller businesses, if you're growing really quickly, like it's hard for those regressions to like keep up when you don't have like really stable seasonality results, as an example. But the experiments are what can come in of just saying, hey, this is what we're actually seeing, and then you can make it more effective as you go. So like super synergistic, and I think things that can partner really well together.
All right, cool. Let's do a little bit of a rapid fire. I'm just going to ask you channel, and just keep it quick, incremental or not. Obviously, give more context, because I know it depends, but like I'm very curious. Like Meta, what do you find there?
Meta's pretty good. Meta's usually
pretty
quite
good.
Yeah.
Have you tested ASC versus manual campaigns?
I probably shouldn't be the expert in giving the specifics of the things that we've tested, but like generally speaking, like Meta's targeting is quite good. Like they're really efficient, and have really like embraced a lot of like the incrementality based initiatives like from the beginning of their marketing. So we definitely see pretty strong results there.
Any experience with any upper funnel events on Meta? Something I'm really curious about, like what happens at least our size now is like when we do, ASC conversion optimized campaigns, like it to me functions middle funnel. If we look at Northbeam, a lot of the traffic is returning visitors. And so a lot of people would be like, hey, you should get, a Meta reps will recommend go upper funnel to kind of fill that funnel and kind of, reach new people. And that's a hard thing to measure with attribution. That's a hard thing to measure within platform, because it's not going to look good. But, is that anything that you've seen any data on with Haus?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen and I can say very broadly, like Meta's pretty good at when you give it a target, it optimizes pretty hard to that target. The reason why something like upper funnel or like site visits, where you find that it ends up being a lot of returning customers, is just, the cost of bringing in entirely new customers is always higher than existing. Like it's harder to get them to click. It's harder to get them to go through. Sure. So there's just some inherent challenges in that. But I think Meta can definitely be quite good. But like those are actually areas. I mean, as a totally orthogonal point, like we've seen really encouraging results with like OTT in those domains. Where like
so I was going to kind of get into some of these like upper funnel, non-click based. But I think definitely testing some of the meta upper funnel events is something I'm super curious, whether it would be video views. We run all of our stuff through a quiz funnel, so I would be really curious about lead gen and seeing like I don't know if what like the ad stack is, like the delay. If we could do like a longer term experiment and see if like we run lead gen, and even if like the ROAS isn't good, if people like longer term are actually buying later on to
Yeah,
get them
and
in?
like what you could be doing is like you could be running like several month long experiments that are always
Okay.
running in the background, and then smaller like that doesn't mean like one of the again cool things about House is we can run multiple experiments concurrently using our platforms. So you could have this like longer term upper funnel experiment running with these smaller experiments or optimization experiments happening along the way to see like do you notice this larger deviation start to take place over time. And also to your point on like I'll say like upper funnel that we've seen generally at House is there's also really places where the cost of the reach is more or less efficient. So if you think of like really like hey we want to bring in new customers like trying to like suppress existing members, we find like it's certain there's like certain low level reach thresholds, certain medium ones that can be like a sweet spot, and then some where you're trying to get those really the people that you haven't reached yet, trying to get them to your site, and the cost of bringing those people there is just prohibitively expensive. And like it's not just like whether you can get them to your site or not, but there's like a huge efficiency conversation for it.
Would some of those channels be?
I mean, YouTube is one that tends to do really well, like for those upper funnel. Say
Okay.
OTT tends to do well for upper funnel. Generally speaking, I completely agree. I think Meta tends to perform best as like somewhere between middle and lower funnel. TikTok is actually one that's performed quite well upper funnel too.
We're
So
really
like,
interesting. I was going to ask about that. I feel like I've heard such mixed things. I have my own experiences with TikTok, but we haven't measured it incrementality, so I'd be super curious there.
I mean, it's also one of those areas where we see I'd say generally speaking, the infrastructure is like, for a company like TikTok, it's a lot newer than it is for like a Google or a Meta. So there's a lot that they're working on in the ads products. We definitely see it being hit or miss, but for the people it hits, it's really efficient and it's really effective. And
And you
like,
see it upper funnel?
you can see it upper funnel as well. Yeah. Like people clicking through. I think one of the challenges that they have is like their platform is just so engaging. People tend to not want to leave it. But we have seen some encouraging results there. Or, we've done a number of experiments in the world of TikTok. And sometimes it just means like TikTok as a platform, I think companies inherently know to be valuable. There's just a question is like, is the ad product valuable? Because like maybe it is on the
Understand.
influencer side, maybe it's not on the advertising side. And we've had customers where we've run these incrementality tests in TikTok, not seeing the upper funnel or lower funnel impact that they're looking for. They've kind of stopped spending, rethought their marketing program, rethought their creative, rethought their targeting, and then we've seen really efficient results. So I'd say
Got it. So it totally
TikTok's a little
depends.
bit more of like you're gold mining, but there's definitely gold there. It's just
That makes
not
sense.
quite.
You got to find it. No, that's interesting what you say because I think I've had mixed results, but definitely noticed like the value. And again, this is before using incrementality, but like the value is not all captured in clicks. And I think it makes sense what you're saying. Like people want to stay on the platform, so they might see you, they might search later, whatever it is. I think that would be an interesting one because we brought TikTok spend really low. At one point last year, we were actually 50-50, same as Meta and TikTok. We found the LTV was not there where we wanted it compared to it. So, but that would be an interesting one to test. Yeah, I mean, our first test that I'm happy to talk about was YouTube. So we ran a 3-cell YouTube. So hold out normal business as usual spend and then 50% increase because we wanted to know how incremental was this. We felt good about kind of our 1-day click in North Beam looked pretty good because theoretically it should be a lot of views. And if we did assume a lot was views, like then we felt like we were very profitable with our 1-day click targets. Post-purchase survey looked really good. As we scaled up, we saw more AMER looked good, but we wanted a little bit more confidence, a little bit more of that, scientific validation. So we ran it. We actually, I think today, just completed the test. We kind of looked after a week, but just finally looked. And what was really cool for us is business as usual. Normal spend was incremental, was like medium to high incrementality. Increased spend, so 50% higher was tell me if this is any good. It was 8% incremental, so 8% lift.
8% is really
To me,
good.
it seems pretty
Yeah.
high.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Like, it's also one of the just like the big things that I think for people to wrap their heads around from an incrementality perspective is like usually people think about ROAS and they're like 400% or like these really big numbers. In the world of incrementality, like 10% is amazing. Like 10% is huge. There's actually a point where if you start seeing your ads get like 15 or 20% incremental, you actually should be more concerned that you aren't driving enough organic traction. Because like ideally, the best customers are people that you don't have to serve advertising to at all. They just kind of
Sure.
come to your company. So if all of your business is driven through those ads, like ideally you actually want the incrementality percentage to go down over time. And for very large enterprises, like, they could have like a huge party at 3 or 4%. Like that, that is, that's a really big win for a large company. And it's why, using a platform like Haus is so important, is like being really precise and like, 3 or 4% is critical to understand, like certainly at an enterprise scale, if things are working or not.
So help me kind of interpret this. Obviously, I've talked to your team about it, and we're kind of working on it. But help me interpret how you would. So again, we have like a 2% incrementality, factor, 2% percentage, in business as usual compared to holdout, and then the 50% higher, we're at like 8 percent, and then we have like I don't want to say exactly what the numbers are, but like the cost per incremental is quite a bit better on the increased spend. How do we go and if we're thinking about things normally in a CPA target, right? Let's say like our cost per incremental on the increased spend is probably 30% better than our CPA. Like how do we think about that and then calibrating whether it's our Northbeam targets or our in-platform targets to kind of make decisions off of?
Yeah, so something you could do is like a lot of our customers do is they calculate something called an incrementality factor of like, hey, what were the number of incremental conversions over the number of platform reported conversions or the report conversions that you're seeing out of Northbeam. And then you could just apply like the lifted over what you're getting out of Northbeam and like, hey, this is a percentage multiplier we can put on top of our MTA to drive some value in it. Okay. But also like what I'll kind of speak to too of like my trying not to have like a completely extreme maximalist approach to these things. Like really what I think this result is showing you is like you have a really strong data point that you could spend more in YouTube profitably. Like I probably wouldn't go to like, it's exactly this percentage, it's exactly, increasing by 50%, but it's like, how do we start increasing this and seeing what the results are getting back and like, as our business is growing? Because, it's something I've also seen from time to time is like, companies have seasonality in their businesses. There's a lot that can be going on that are beyond the controls of specifically what's happening in the ad platform during this period of time. But what it is it's a really encouraging signal and really encouraging data that you can be like, hey, I want to, if you're looking at platform reporting, you could calibrate that off of these results. Like knowing Jones Road, you can be really applying this against your MTA and your Northbeam results. But really, I think the question then was like, all right, let's start scaling this up. Like, let's start to see what that looks like over time. And you could potentially run more experiments, but maybe it's something where you start to scale it up. You also always have the question of like, all right, so where is this investment going to come from? Is it going to come from another channel? Is it just going to be net new budget? But then, testing again next quarter to say like, is it still performing in the ways that we expect? And like, the reality of like, hey, this is a 50% increase. Like maybe the right amount is 25% up, or maybe the right amount is 250% up. Like you're not.
Or maybe we can do different objectives. So, we can do one, like we considered this one, the 50% increase, we kept it on sales, but we could do like reach and split up the budget a little bit for a different one.
Exactly. So it's sort of like more questions to answer and more opportunities.
Yeah. So we can assume that based on this results, we can apply some incrementality factor and things look better than in-platform does and better than just click-only data, which makes sense if we believe that YouTube is upper funnel. You've probably seen this where like, there's data now that like almost 50% of all YouTube watching is happening on a television on like a smart TV, which is kind of wild, but like there's no clicks.
Terrible attribution.
You know what I mean?
Big problem.
Terrible click. So this is a perfect example. And again, I feel really confident because we're going to make pretty significant investments in this. Like summer's slow for us, but probably Q3, Q4, pretty significant investments, especially ahead of Black Friday and stuff like that. I think the size we're at, it's like we can no longer just go meta. Like we can only do that when, what I always tell people is like meta is the best at getting people who are ready to buy.
Yep.
But you have to get them ready to buy. And to me, that's when these other platforms have to come in.
And well, it's also funny of like just even hearing you say that, like getting people ready to buy and then buying, like there's an embedded incrementality question in that of like, well, if they're really ready to buy, do they need the ad at all? Or would you have gotten them
That's
some other
fair.
way?
That's fair. That's fair.
I
maybe
think
there's a little bit more nuance there because like meta is very highly incremental for us, but
yeah. Oh no, I mean, I think Meta for a lot of like the D2C space, I think like a lot of companies' businesses were built on Meta, and like this is where I don't want to get like a high horse about how these systems work, but I think like if you think about, and I know this will be like a hornet's nest, but like an Advantage Shopping Plus or a Performance Max, which I know is like a very mixed review from an advertising standpoint. And like we actually just released a pretty cool case study on PMAX.
Yeah, let's talk. I would love to talk through that.
Caraway. But like when you go into these areas, like if you think about it from like a really broad strategic standpoint, from like Meta and from Google's POV, they know some of their inventory is really valuable and they know some of their inventory is not as valuable. And the solution is like, let's bundle it. Like it'll come out to an efficient enough CPA, things will be cheap enough, put some like visibility controls in place. Like, I think when we did this in the early days of like universal app campaigns, like some advertisers refused to buy it because they're like, we don't know how much is coming via brand search and we don't think that's incremental. So like, we're not doing it full stop. But really, it's these more aggregated approaches to like how they're able to bundle things together and potentially make more money. And I think like our Caraway case study, which we can talk about, is just like super interesting use case of, even within these more black box style ads products, like how do you start to optimize them in a way that makes sense for you?
So Caraway did 3-cell. They did hold out PMAX with brand exclusions and PMAX with no brand exclusions. Is that correct?
Yep.
And what did they find?
And they found that PMAX without brand exclusion, so like including brand terms in PMAX, ended up being, I think, pretty considerably more efficient. Like we can kind of direct people to our case study on it, but the results were quite good from them. And I think this is where, again, I think there's like that more nuanced, longer tail, like where I said earlier, like sometimes advertising can work on a bit of an S curve, where if you think of like any sort of conversion optimizing algorithm, like a PMAX, an Advantage Shopping Plus, like any of these types of systems, often they can just do a better job in optimizing to conversions with more conversion volume. So even if some of those conversions are not as incremental itself, what it does is it's giving Google more signal of what types of users are likely to convert. And so even if those are really like inexpensive and potentially efficient conversion results, they're then able to bring in other types of customers who reflect those people who might be purchasing on those brand terms, and that creates this halo of efficiency that can happen for the company.
And it gives them more data within that ad group and that campaign, which is where the targeting. So that makes sense. That models what I see on Meta. This was even prior to Advantage Plus when we kind of stopped retargeting, but I also find this with Advantage Plus, how you can kind of pick what percentage of spend you want to go after existing customers that you upload and stuff like that. Is when that is to zero, or when people are hard excluding customers, I find efficiency is worse, and sometimes you actually spend more on existing customers. I believe it's the machine trying to find data and being like starving for data, versus when you allow that cap to get a little higher, so you can go after existing people, it'll almost show to them first, get some data, and then be able to model off of that a little bit better. Is that kind of what you're saying?
100%. Like these are the exact kind of like counterintuitive areas where intuition doesn't actually make business sense. Where like your intuition is like, we want new customers, let's exclude our existing customers. But sometimes when you go for those really hard exclusions, the models aren't getting enough data to train. And like it'll depend on the product a little bit. Like companies I've worked with who tend to have the hardest customer exclusions are like subscription products. Hey, if someone's already subscribing, we might not need them to do something else. Sometimes I've seen people use that for retention. Like, how do we target existing customers, let them know about functionality or something else that just makes them more likely to, or like less likely to churn and more likely to upsell them potentially. But really, I think people tend to get way too concerned around, hey, should we be excluding these existing customers? Because like really what we're all trying to do is like feed the system more data such that it can build better, stronger relationships in other networks and bring in more.
But that's something you could test if you want to do a 3-cell,
100%.
Do Advantage Plus, 0% new customers, 10%, 15%, test that, see not just what gives you the best one-day click, but what's giving you the best new customer.
100%. And this is one where if I had to guess, I think it will be particularly customer specific. I think companies can see wildly different results here because based on the type of product you have or how like the purchase cycles or what you're trying to get them to buy or how you're trying to get it to buy, I think there'd be like a pretty broad variation on this. And it's like a great example of like, you know, generally with like the world of testing or incrementality, I say like focus on the big bets first. Like how is Google doing? How is Meta doing? How is YouTube doing? But then when you like, all right, let's go into some of the specifics. Like, should we be enabling 10% of existing customers or 30 or 20? Like those are some really powerful nuances that then companies will get
So you just keep them rolling, start with big stuff, and then once you get something, you just continue to keep it rolling. You just always have something going in the back burner.
Yeah.
Smaller.
The goal is sort of like, you're just sort of calibrating where you are. Like if you think about it as like, I live in the Bay Area. I live in, former Googler. I live in Mountain View. Say I'm trying to get to New York. The question for me isn't like, how do I get plopped right in the middle of Midtown Manhattan? Sort of like, all right, first, how do I go east? And then once I'm going east, how do I go northeast? And then like, all right, I'm in the northeastern corridor. Like, how do I get to New York State? And like, it's really like, how do you get yourself to the right place? I think often people want like a one-stop, do this one thing one time. You have perfect results. They're incredibly clean. You know everything that you're ever trying to do. But the reality is like the world is messy, and like I think the companies who tend to do the best here are getting better every day, using this type of data to just get closer and closer and closer. So that way, at some point, like all of your marketing is like in that example, in like the middle of Midtown Manhattan. And then the question then is like, okay, we've really dialed things in. How do we make sure things don't go too far out of this radius? Like that's where the question becomes over time.
That makes sense. I love it. Well, I'm learning a lot. This is great. I gotta get going soon, and so I'll totally let you go. But this is great. I had a great time chatting. I learned a lot. I think our listeners will learn a lot. Not only people, smaller brands who are just getting their feet wet and learning about this stuff, all the way to kind of 8 and 9 figure brands who are doing this. Want to let you kind of shout out Haus, kind of plug anything you want to. Where can people learn about you and then find more about Haus if they're interested?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the types of things that we do, but really I think where we're most helpful or where to give us a call is just if you're trying to have more data for your decisions and you're trying to like improve over time, like get some hard data, calibrate it to the right results, and kind of build out alternative frameworks to understand effectiveness that can be compatible with an MTA or an MMM or platform reporting. Everything from Haus is at haus.io, HAUS.io. And we've got like great case studies there, product solutions, but give us a shout and we're always happy to chat.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, definitely highly recommend Haus. Happy customer, definitely helping us kind of learn and grow and scale. So if you're kind of 8, 9 figures in your multiple channels and want to know what's working best or where you should put your money going forward, highly recommend it. It's been insanely helpful for us. But thanks so much, Zach. We'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Cody.